Jackson Collins was returning home after a long day at work. He felt tired, but as always, he didn't show it. Around him, the landscapes of Los Angeles changed, turning from busy streets into secluded neighborhoods of elite mansions. His house stood on a hill, huge and immaculate, as if the personification of his success. Huge panoramic windows shone in the glow of the setting sun, creating the illusion of warmth and comfort. The gate opened automatically, allowing his Mercedes into the perfectly paved driveway. Even the gravel was laid out impeccably, emphasizing the order that reigns in this house. He turned off the engine and paused for a few seconds, looking at the facade. There was not a single unnecessary detail here. Everything looked as if it had come out of the pages of an architectural magazine. But despite this, he felt a strange emptiness. He exhaled, ran his hand over his face, and finally opened the car door. There was a subtle aroma of freshly cut grass in the air, mixed with a light breeze carrying the coolness of the evening. Everything looked perfect, as always. When Jack entered the house, he was greeted by the soft scent of jasmine and dim lighting in the living room. Emily, his wife, sat on a white leather sofa with a glass of red wine in her hand. She was wearing a tight silk dress that showed off her figure and the gold pendant he had given her for her last anniversary. She looked at him with her usual smile. "Hello, dear," she said, looking up from the phone. "How was your day?" "As usual," he replied, taking off his jacket and heading towards the bar. "Lots of meetings, negotiations." "How's yours?" Emily took a sip of wine and shrugged. "Yes, so I went to the spa a little, enjoyed a massage and aromatherapy. Then I met with Lisa. We walked around the park for a long time, discussing everything fashion, plans for the summer, what new restaurants have opened in the center. We went into the boutiques a bit, looked at the jewelry. Purely feminine conversations, light and unobtrusive." Jack nodded, filling his glass with whiskey. There doesn't seem to be anything unusual, but something in her tone made him wary. He knew Emily for more than 10 years and felt her mood by the slightest changes in her facial expression. Now there was something alien in her eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, coming closer. Emily looked away as if thinking for a second. "Certainly, just a little tired." She smiled, but the smile seemed forced to Jack. He sat down next to her, hugged her shoulders, but felt how she barely noticeable tensed. "Are you sure?" He ran his finger over her wrist, feeling her pulse speed up slightly. "Yes, of course." Emily quickly took another sip of wine and put the glass on the table. "I was just thinking a lot today. About us, about life." "About us?" Jack frowned. "What are you talking about?" Emily shook her head. "Nothing serious, just thoughts." Jack looked at her searchingly, but did not continue his questions. He knew that if he pressed, Emily would withdraw even more. Instead, he decided to change the subject. "Maybe we can go somewhere for the weekend. Let's take a walk and relax like before." "Sounds good," she nodded, but her voice did not sound confident. She hinted for the 1,000th time that he was paying too little attention to her, but as always, Jack either did not catch it or chose to ignore it. There was silence for a moment. Jack took a sip of whiskey, feeling a pleasant warmth spreading through his body. The thought flashed through his head that he didn't like all this. She looked the same, spoke the same, but something was wrong. The phone rang. Emily flinched and quickly grabbed it from the table. She immediately locked the screen, but this gesture did not go unnoticed. "Who is this?" he asked calmly. "Nobody," she answered too quickly. "Just Lisa. She probably forgot to say something." Jack didn't argue, but something ached inside him. He never liked it when people lie, especially when they lie so clumsily. He decided that he would check her phone tomorrow. Jack had just gotten out of the shower when he heard Emily enter the bedroom. He put on a robe, dried his hair with a towel, and saw her. She was standing at the window, looking at the dark silhouette of the city, illuminated by streetlights. There was something tense in her posture. "We need to talk," she said quietly, without turning around. Jack felt his throat tighten. The phrase, "we need to talk," never boded well. Possible scenarios flashed through my head. Does she want a divorce? Found a lover? He slowly walked over and sat on the edge of the bed, trying not to show his anxiety. "Did something happen?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. Emily turned to him. In her eyes, he saw something strange, a mixture of excitement, fear, and joy. Her eyes sparkled, but was it from happiness or from suppressed tears? Her breathing was unsteady. Her lips trembled slightly as if she was afraid, but at the same time she wanted him to share this moment with her. She clasped her fingers together, as if hoping his reaction would be what she wanted. At that moment, her face seemed both radiant and vulnerable. "I'm pregnant, Jack." The words came unexpectedly, like a flash of lightning in a clear sky. Jack's heart froze and then began to beat wildly. Thousands of thoughts raced through his head. Error? Joke? He knew it was impossible. A cold wave ran through his body. "Are you sure?" he could barely say. "Yes," Emily smiled, clearly expecting a different reaction. "I took the test several times. Everything was confirmed. Isn't this wonderful?" Jack felt panic rising within him. He knew it was not a miracle. They decided before marriage that children were not part of their plans. He remembered that evening when they discussed this over a bottle of wine, completely confident in their decision. "Children? No, Jack, you understand, this will ruin our lives," Emily laughed, lazily tracing the rim of her glass with her finger. "I don't want to exchange night walks, travel, freedom for endless diapers and sleepless nights. You think so too, don't you?" Her voice sounded so confident then, and he nodded because for him work and career were most important. They were on the same wavelength, it seemed, forever. But there was another reason, more terrible, which only he knew about. He couldn't have children. Never. Years ago, during a routine medical examination, doctors informed him of his infertility. It was a blow, but Jack decided that this information should remain only with him. He didn't want to look weak or inferior in the eyes of others. The only person he ever trusted was his best friend Steve Henderson, a former detective. "Will you tell Emily?" Steve then asked, looking at him intently. "No." "Why?" "We both don't want children." "It doesn't change anything," Jack answered, convincing not only his friend, but also himself. However, now, facing this stunning news, he realized that his secret had become his winning one thanks to him. He would not allow himself to be cuckolded and mocked. Jack stood up and walked over to the window, looking at his wife's reflection in the glass. My head was buzzing. He was trying to figure out what to do next. It was as if the bedroom walls were starting to close in around him. We agreed that this wouldn't happen. His voice sounded harsher than he intended. Emily frowned, her smile fading. "I know, but sometimes plans change," she said, taking a step towards him. "Maybe this is a sign. Maybe this way you can devote more time to me." Jack clenched his hands into fists, his nails dug painfully into his palms, but he didn't even notice the pain. A real hurricane of emotions raged inside him: anger, humiliation, contempt, fear. She cheated on him. It was a fact that was now seared into his consciousness with terrifying clarity. She didn't just cheat, she tried to make him a cuckold, force him to raise someone else's child, and at the same time openly manipulated him and put pressure on him. Everything they built over the years, their alliance, their promises to each other, their trust, everything turned out to be a lie. If only she knew what hell was going on in his soul right now. How her every gesture, every false smile, every attempt to speak in a gentle voice only inflamed his rage even more. But he couldn't tell her the truth. Not now. Not at this moment. He felt his heart pounding wildly, like an attack of icy, chilling rage. But no, he won't scream. He won't let her know that anything is wrong. He will do everything his way, calmly, methodically, as always. He turned to her, trying to find words that wouldn't betray his confusion. "We need to think things over, Emily. This is too unexpected." She squeezed his hand as if she didn't understand his reaction. "Just say you're glad. Isn't that the most important thing?" Jack closed his eyes for a moment, trying not to show his true emotions. He remembered all their conversations about the future, their agreement that the family would remain just the two of them. Now all this has crumbled to dust. Of course it's important. He cleared his throat, searching for words. But do you understand that this is a huge responsibility? How will this change your life? Are you ready to give up your freedom, evenings in restaurants, travel, ease, and carefreeness? Do you realize that your body will also change, that this is not just a new stage, but a complete transformation? Are you sure you're ready for this? Emily smiled softly, but there was a hint of disappointment in her eyes. Of course, I'm ready. I just hoped you'd be happy too. Jack turned to the window. The streets of the city below were twinkling with lights, but his world was suddenly plunged into darkness. He knew one thing: this child was not his. The question was, what to do now? He couldn't just accept it, close his eyes, and allow himself to become a victim of betrayal. No, he is not the kind of person who will allow himself to be laughed at, to be turned into a pathetic, deceived husband. He had to draw up a clear plan of action. No panic, no fuss. Calm and methodical, as always. Any mistake could be costly, and therefore he had to think through every step to the smallest detail. At such moments, he always relied on cold calculation, on his ability to cut off emotions like unnecessary ballast. The first step is to find out who the real father was. This thought burned him from the inside, made his heart pound dully in his chest, but he could not allow himself to succumb to rage. He needed facts, irrefutable evidence, not guesses and emotions. He will not blame blindly. He will not throw words around. No, he will check every action so that in the end he has a complete picture of what is happening. The second is to decide what to do with Emily. She betrayed him, stabbed him in the back, and probably didn't even feel remorse. Did you think that you could control him, manipulate him like a toy, put pressure on his feelings, play on his weaknesses? He's wrong. He will not allow her to destroy his life with impunity. He will not let this betrayal go unnoticed. Anger was boiling inside him, but he suppressed it, pushed it deep inside so as not to allow himself to lash out. This should not be an impulsive, vindictive action. No, everything should be calculated, cold-blooded, and impeccable. She must understand that her actions will not pass without a trace, and he will make sure that in the end, control will be in his hands. Anger bubbled in his chest, but he controlled himself. The time for emotions will come. Now it's a cold calculation. It's a game now, and he intends to win it. Jack clasped his hands on the windowsill, his gaze fixed on the lights of the night city. A whirlwind of thoughts raged in my head, but suddenly my consciousness made a sharp turn back into the past. He remembered their first meeting. It was a charity auction organized by a large foundation for helping children from disadvantaged families, an evening full of glitz, luxury, and good intentions. The event took place in the elegant ballroom of one of the most prestigious hotels in the center of Manhattan, where an atmosphere of aristocratic grandeur reigned. Tall marble columns, draped in golden garlands like ancient guardians, supported a vaulted ceiling decorated with intricate stucco. Carved patterns created the illusion of weightlessness, and thin gilding shimmered in the soft light, giving the hall a fabulous look. Along the perimeter of the hall, there were long arched windows, through which the muted light of the night city penetrated, complementing the atmosphere of secret sophistication. A massive crystal chandelier sparkled in the center of the room. Its numerous faces scattered thousands of reflections on the mirrored walls and polished surfaces of the tables. It seemed as if small fireflies were hovering in the air, reflected in tall glasses of champagne filled with sparkling gold. The light clinking of glass, muffled conversations, laughter of guests, and quiet live music coming from an elegant stage at the far wall created the atmosphere of a sophisticated evening, full of promises and hopes. Guests, dressed in elegant suits and evening dresses, slowly moved around the hall, animatedly talking and exchanging polite smiles. The sounds of live music performed by a string quartet smoothly filled the space, creating an atmosphere of sophisticated grace. Waiters in immaculate white gloves moved silently among the guests, offering oysters, miniature tartlets, and glasses of sparkling wine on silver trays. The rich aroma of expensive perfume hung in the air, mixed with subtle notes of freshly cut roses, lilies, and gardenias, arranged in stately vases along the walls. This place exudes luxury, and every element of it emphasized the high status of the event. Jack had never particularly enjoyed such gatherings, filled with small talk, ostentatious charity, and the glitter of expensive jewelry. However, his company was one of the main sponsors of the evening, which means his presence was not just welcome, it was necessary. He stood at one of the tables, holding a glass of champagne in his hands, and absent-mindedly listened to the presenter, who announced the next lot with feigned enthusiasm. The auction manager's voice sounded confident, captivating the audience, but Jack barely caught the meaning of what was said, his thoughts hovering somewhere far away. It was at this moment that his gaze accidentally stumbled upon a woman standing at the bar. She seemed to stand out among the guests, despite the fact that she did nothing to attract attention. She wore an elegant dark blue dress that perfectly accentuated her slender figure. The smooth fabric flowed softly, reflecting the light of crystal chandeliers, and open shoulders only added to the image of exquisite fragility. But what attracted him most was not the dress or the grace of her figure, but her demeanor. Her movements were smooth and graceful, as if honed, but without artificiality. There was insight in her gaze, and the slight half-smile playing on her lips gave her a touch of mystery, as if she knew something inaccessible to others. She didn't fuss, didn't try to attract the attention of others, but simply casually twirled a glass of wine in her hands, leisurely running her finger along the thin glass. It seemed that this whole noisy evening with its brilliance and bustle did not have much meaning for her. She just watched with a slight, almost mocking smile, as if predicting how the events of this evening would unfold. Emily. She looked as if she was here not for the auction, but for the atmosphere itself, her posture, confident gaze, thin, graceful neck, sparkling earrings that emphasized her sophistication. Jack remembered how at that moment everything around seemed to dim, and she became the only bright spot in the room. She was not just present in the hall, she attracted everyone's attention. He watched her continuously, trying to catch every detail, the movements of her hands, the slight tilt of her head, the expression in her eyes when she talked to people. There was no deliberate flirtatiousness or desire to attract attention to herself. Rather, she seemed like a woman for whom the admiring glances of others were common, but did not mean much. She did not seek approval, did not strive to shine, and this is what made her even more attractive. Jack noticed how lightly, almost weightlessly, she gestures when she speaks, how she slightly raises her eyebrow in moments of sincere interest, and how the corners of her lips twitch in the shadow of a half-smile when the interlocutor says something funny. She felt confident, but without challenge, lightness, but without frivolity. At some point, one of the guests, passing by, inadvertently touched her with his elbow. The woman swayed slightly, and the ruby liquid in her glass tilted dangerously, ready to spill onto the expensive fabric of her dress. Jack, who was only a few steps away, reacted instantly. In one fluid motion, he grabbed her hand, steadying the glass before the wine could spill. For a moment their eyes met. Her eyes, deep, rich in color, with a reflection of light from the chandeliers, widened slightly in surprise, but then something else, barely perceptible, flashed in them. Jack felt his fingertips touch her wrist. The skin was warm, smooth, tender, and at that moment something trembled inside him, as if an invisible string was vibrating from a barely perceptible touch. The woman smiled slowly, not breaking away, but not holding this moment longer than necessary. Then she smoothly removed her hand, making it as if she had allowed him to touch exactly as much as she wanted. "Careful," he said, and their eyes met. A sparkle of amusement flashed in her eyes, but also a slight challenge. She looked at him carefully, as if appraising him, before allowing herself to smile. "Thank you. I think this was my signal to order a new glass, or a sign to meet the one who saved you from disaster," he answered with a slight smile. This is how their conversation began. They talked about the evening, about the lots, about how all this luxury sometimes seems too artificial. He remembered her laugh, ringing, but not pretentious, her subtle sarcasm, her lightness. She wasn't trying to impress, she was just being herself, and it was fascinating. She talked about her work, about how she happened to be this evening, about how rarely she meets people who can carry on a real conversation and not just chat about money and connections. By the end of the evening, he already knew that he wanted to see her again. He knew that she was not just a guest this evening, she was a woman who could turn his world upside down. But if he had known then how everything would turn out. Their romance developed rapidly, like a whirlwind that swirled them in a series of bright events. Jack and Emily were different, but it was this difference that attracted them. He is a calculating, ambitious person, accustomed to keeping everything under control. She is free, frivolous, living in the moment. Together, they created the perfect balance. Jack knew from the very beginning that he could give Emily everything she wanted. He was not a man to make big promises, but his actions spoke for themselves. Her whims and desires were fulfilled instantly: travel, expensive jewelry, designer clothes, secluded villas by the ocean. Emily easily enjoyed this life, but not because of material benefits. She liked that she had a man next to her who was strong, confident, and ready to provide her with carefree happiness. They traveled the world, staying in the best hotels, tasting the most delicious dishes, swimming in the ocean under the moon, and walking the night streets of Paris, Rome, and Tokyo. They were easy with each other. They were not burdened by obligations. They simply enjoyed life. Their world was filled with laughter, spontaneous decisions, long evenings over glasses of wine, and conversations that never ended. Jack worked hard, sometimes too much. His life was scheduled minute by minute. Endless meetings, negotiations, deals, reports, all this took time, energy, sometimes even leaving him with a feeling that he was gradually turning into a machine programmed only to work. But at first, he always had time for Emily. She was his outlet, his salvation from routine, that very unexpected flash of light that filled everyday life with colors. He loved her energy, unquenchable, seething, exciting. She never sat still. Her thirst for life seemed inexhaustible. Emily knew how to see beauty in every moment, to find adventure even where, it would seem, there could not be one. She could change their plans overnight, suddenly offer to go to another country for a weekend, and he, without further hesitation, agreed, because he knew these moments were worth it. He remembered how they raced through the night streets of Paris on a rented scooter, laughing and not caring what time it was. How we greeted the sunrise on a deserted beach in Greece, walking barefoot on the cold sand, holding in our hands a bottle of wine bought in a small local shop. One day, completely spontaneously, we ended up at a winery in Tuscany, where we spent the whole day tasting the best varieties of red and chatting with the owners like old friends. With her, he forgot about time, about work, about the endless responsibilities that always hung over him like a heavy burden. She filled his life with light and lightness, like a ray of sun breaking through thick clouds. Looking back, Jack realized that he was truly happy then. Everything worked perfectly. They didn't try to change each other, everyone remained themselves, and that suited them. They were just together, and that was enough. Jack remembered well the day he first met Emily's parents. Their opinions meant a lot to her, and although she didn't say it directly, he could feel how much she wanted everything to go perfectly. However, Jack himself was not worried. Years in business had accustomed him to negotiations of any complexity, and he knew how to find a common language with different people. The ability to make a good impression had become something natural, almost automatic for him, so he saw no reason why this meeting could be an exception. Emily's parents lived in a small but cozy house in the suburbs, in a place where life flowed smoothly and calmly, far from the noise of the metropolis. It was a house with a white facade, surrounded by a low wooden fence, behind which stretched a well-kept garden. In it one could notice neatly trimmed bushes, several flower beds, and a spreading tree with a wide crown, under which stood a bench, as if created for long evening conversations. Although the garden looked a little neglected in places, weeds were growing here and there, and leaves were falling along the path, this only added to the special charm of the place, creating a feeling of a warm, lived-in space. When Jack crossed the threshold, he immediately felt the atmosphere of this house. There was a feeling of comfort, reliability, something simple, but incredibly important. Family photographs hung on the walls. Here is Emily as a child, laughing, sitting on her father's shoulders. Now, as a teenager, with his mother in the kitchen, stained with flour, but clearly happy. Here's graduation, here's Christmas. The whole house seemed to be organized around one single figure, their daughter. In her room, apparently, everything remained the same as it was in childhood, and every corner of the house seemed to contain memories of her life. Mr. and Mrs. Hale were people of average income, not accustomed to luxury, but ready to give everything for the sake of their one and only daughters. They allowed Emily everything, fulfilled her wishes, and never put barriers in front of her. She was their little princess, and even now, as an adult woman, she remained the center of the universe for them. Her mother, Sandra, turned out to be a friendly woman with soft features, kind eyes, and a warm smile that immediately put her at ease. There was a sense of lightness in her movements, and there was genuine concern in her voice. It seemed that this woman was used to filling the house with comfort, creating an atmosphere of warmth and understanding around her. She quickly joined the conversation, asking Jack with sincere interest about everything, about his work, family, childhood, what he loves, and what he strives for. But there was no meticulousness or suspicion in her questions, only a desire to better know the person to whom her daughter entrusted her heart. Sandra listened attentively, nodding in time with the words, sometimes asking again, clarifying details, but it all looked completely natural, like an ordinary friendly conversation. Jack felt she was not trying to test him, she was not looking for a trick. It was really important for her to understand who was standing in front of her. Emily's father, Harold, was the complete opposite of his wife. Tall, with slightly graying hair and a strong, albeit slightly stupid, build, he behaved with restraint, carefully watching his guest. His movements did not have the openness that Sandra had, and his facial expression showed hidden wariness. He silently listened to their conversation, nodding occasionally, but his gaze remained attentive and appraising. Harold was not a man to make rash judgments. He seemed to be studying Jack, testing him not with words, but with his eyes, analyzing every word spoken, every movement. Although he did not express open dissatisfaction, Jack felt that this man was not as simple as he might seem. There was no hostility in his gaze, but there was a silent question in it, which Jack had to answer not with words, but with actions. Asterisk, asterisk, is he really ready to make Emily happy? But at some point the tension subsided a little. When Emily, laughing, began to tell how, as a child, she once decided to tame a street raccoon and hid it in her room, Harold finally smiled. "Oh yes, we all remember this robber," he nodded, leaning back in his chair. "I went into her room, and this damn animal was already nestled in the closet and was trying to open a bag of cookies." Sandra laughed and added, "And when we finally caught him and released him, Emily walked around the house for 2 weeks with a sign saying, 'Bring back my friend.' That was a very smart raccoon," Emily giggled. "Much smarter than I wanted to admit." Jack chuckled as he saw her parents fondly remember their daughter's childhood antics. This was their life, simple, warm, full of love and good memories. And now he realized that they only wanted the best for her. At dinner, the conversation went casually, as if they were not at their first meeting, but had known each other for a long time. The homely atmosphere, filled with comfort, was conducive to a warm conversation, and the light aroma of baked meat and fresh pastries created a feeling of comfort and tranquility. Emily's parents received Jack cordially, without unnecessary tension or formalities. Sandra, with her natural warmth, continued to ask him about life, about his childhood, about the people who influenced him. Her eyes sparkled with interest as he talked about his first steps in his career, the obstacles he had to overcome, and what was really important to him. Her gaze showed sincere admiration. She did not hide the fact that she considered him a purposeful and caring man, capable of taking responsibility for their daughter. Harold continued to be more reserved. He asked almost no questions, listened more, occasionally inserting short but succinct remarks. However, Jack noticed how from time to time the man nodded with slight approval to his words, how his lips trembled subtly in the shadow of a smile when Sandra commented with admiration on Jack's story. It was a kind of silent recognition, not enthusiastic, but quite sincere. Jack felt that they were really happy to have him with Emily. The feeling, warm and reassuring, filled him with a slight sense of confidence. He realized that he was welcome here not because he was supposed to be, but because they saw in him a person who could make their daughter happy. and at that moment he realized that he really wanted to live up to their expectations. After dinner, as the evening came to an end, Emily suddenly suggested, "Jack, let's go to the club. I want to introduce you to my best friend." He looked at her with slight surprise, but didn't mind. Emily was up to something, and judging by her satisfied smile, he was in for an interesting acquaintance. Half an hour later, they found themselves in a noisy, stylish establishment with a relaxed, energetic atmosphere. The air was filled with the light aroma of cocktails and coffee, laughter and snatches of conversation were heard all around, and live music was quietly playing in the corner on a small stage. In the light of dim lamps, Emily quickly found Lisa with her eyes, a tall, slender brown-haired woman with thick wavy hair gathered in a careless ponytail. Lisa had that special charisma that immediately attracted people. Her brown eyes sparkled with a sly sparkle, and her light smile, full of hidden mischief, hinted that she was one of those who was always one step ahead. She moved easily and naturally, like a cat, confident in her grace, and knowing that the whole world was at her paws. Jack immediately realized that this was not just Emily's friend, but her confidant, a person who sees people through and certainly will not allow him to make a mistake. As they got closer, Lisa looked Jack up and down, crossing her arms over her chest, and then broke into a wide smile. "So that's what you are, Mr. Perfect," she drawled, raising her eyebrows slyly. Jack chuckled, shaking her hand. "I hope I made a decent impression." "Oh, I'm still thinking about it," Lisa said meaningfully, winking at Emily. "But I warn you right away, if you deviate even a millimeter from the course of my friend's happiness, I will be the first to find you. And come on, I'm not one of those who writes long posts on social networks about revenge. I will begin to act immediately." Jack grinned. "So, without trial or investigation?" "Oh no, there will be a trial," Lisa smiled innocently. "It's just that the prosecution, the defense, and the verdict are all in one hand." "Mine." Emily rolled her eyes, but with a smile. "Liz, don't scare the man." "Don't worry, Em. He looks like a strong guy. He can handle it." Lisa waved him off, and then, looking at Jack, added, "Although, if you are really ready to be with this woman, you better be not just strong, but unbending." They started talking, and Jack soon realized that Lisa was not just Emily's friend. She was her personal bodyguard, her voice of reason and chaos at the same time, the person who knew her better than anyone else. When it came time to introduce Emily to his family, Jack didn't feel anxious, but he knew that the evening would be a real test. His father, Richard Collins, was a tough and demanding man. The owner of a huge business, he built his empire from scratch, and is accustomed to the fact that in his world everything is subject to discipline, rules, and clear calculations. He always put work above all else, and made the highest demands of his eldest son, Jack, unlike his youngest son, Kevin, whom he considered his failure. Jack's mother, Marian Collins, was the complete opposite of her husband. Kind, cheerful, with an impeccable sense of humor, she always knew how to diffuse a tense atmosphere. Her bright smile and sincere laughter filled the house with warmth, which Jack often did not notice as a child due to constant pressure from his father. Marian loved her sons equally, but knew that there was always a gap between them. Kevin Collins, Jack's younger brother, was his complete opposite. Charming, charismatic, he easily found a common language with people, but always remained in the shadow of his older brother. Unlike Jack, who strictly followed a predetermined path, Kevin enjoyed life, seized moments, and did not miss the chance to have fun. His father always treated him with cold indifference, without hiding his disappointment, and Kevin got used to it. But deep down, he dreamed of proving that he was also worth something. When Jack and Emily entered the Collins family home, they were greeted by a luxurious but austere interior, imbued with the spirit of power and tradition. Father, as always, was sitting in his office, sorting out papers, but came out to meet him as soon as he heard footsteps. "Jackson," Richard nodded dryly, looking at Emily appraisingly. "Glad to finally meet you. I hope you have serious intentions." Marian immediately entered into the conversation, ignoring her husband's stern tone. "Oh, Emily, darling, come in." She hugged the girl warmly, as if she were already part of the family. "We've heard so much about you, and I'm so glad to finally meet you." Emily smiled, feeling supported. "Thank you, Mrs. Collins. I'm very glad too." "Oh dear, just call me Marion, otherwise I will feel old." Jack's mother laughed, casting an expressive glance at her husband. "Let's sit down. Tell me about yourself." Meanwhile, Kevin appeared at the door, leaning lazily against the frame. "So, here she is, the famous Emily," he grinned, looking her up and down with an interested look. "I wonder what you found in him." Jack tensed, but Emily just grinned. "Oh, Kevin, don't you know that sometimes opposites attract?" she answered with a smile, taking a sip of wine. Marion, seizing the moment, turned the conversation to a more pleasant topic. "So, when is the wedding? Have you already planned something?" she asked, clearly rejoicing at the upcoming event. "We're just discussing it now," Jack replied, glancing at Emily. "But Emily has already chosen several places where she would like to hold the ceremony. I dream of a wedding on the coast, somewhere in California," Emily added dreamily. "Can you imagine? White sand, sea, sunset." "Oh, that sounds great." Marion perked up. "The main thing is, don't forget to invite me to help with the organization." Richard just nodded, as if weighing the information. "The main thing is that it is worthy of the Collins family," he added dryly. "And of course, it is reasonable from a legal point of view. We're practical people, Jackson. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about." Jack and Emily's wedding day was the epitome of luxury and sophistication. The spacious terrace of an elite country mansion was surrounded by snow-white tents, decorated with fresh flowers and shimmering garlands. The air was filled with the aroma of fresh roses, vanilla, and expensive champagne, and the soft light of hundreds of candles created the atmosphere of a real fairy tale. The smooth melody of a string quartet flowed through the garden, interspersed with the quiet laughter of the guests. The ringing glass clink of glasses and the quick clicks of cameras photographers captured every moment, turning this day into eternity. Emily looked dazzling. Her dress, created by a famous designer, shimmered in the rays of sunlight as if it were woven from the dawn itself. The long veil floated in the air, caught by a light breeze, adding weightlessness to her look. She walked towards the altar with the grace that only women have who are confident in their every move, but a hurricane of emotions raged inside her. Standing at the altar in an impeccably fitted classic suit, Jack looked as if he had just stepped off the cover of a magazine. But as soon as Emily came closer, he leaned towards her and whispered with a slight grin, "There's still time to escape, miss. They say the second try is always better." She looked up at him, squinting, and also answered in a whisper, "Are you first, Mr. Contract? Maybe before the guests notice, we'll just divide everything in half and go home." Jack could hardly contain his smile. On the eve of the wedding, they had a difficult conversation. "Jack," Emily nervously fingered the hem of her dress, sitting in his spacious office. Her voice was quiet, but there was tension in it. "This marriage contract, is it really necessary?" Jack sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. He understood her doubts perfectly, but there was nowhere to retreat. "Emily, you know that for my father, this is a matter of principle." He tried to speak calmly, but he could feel the tension thickening in the air. "This is not a matter of mistrust, but a precautionary measure. This is the protection of my family, my business, everything that I have built over the years. You know that I love you, but I need to sign a document that will leave me bare-assed if something goes wrong." Her lips trembled, there was bitterness in her voice, and something dangerous flashed in her eyes. Jack curled his fingers, looking at her. "This is standard procedure," he said softly but firmly. "You do understand that this is how it is in our world, right?" Emily slowly turned her gaze to the papers in front of her. She had read them before, and each line now smacked of cold steel. The point was simple. In the event of a divorce through her fault, that is, if she cheats or betrays him in any way, she will leave with nothing, not a cent, not a house, not a jointly acquired property. If they separate by mutual consent, Emily will receive decent payments, or if, God forbid, one of them dies, all property goes completely to the second spouse. She knew it was his father's doing. a person who always saw marriage as a strategic alliance and people as potential traitors. But what hurt her most was that Jack accepted it, that even he couldn't refuse this insurance. Emily looked into his eyes long, intently. Her gaze mixed with resentment, understanding, and something else that he couldn't figure out. Then she nodded. Fine. If that's what you need for your peace of mind, I'll sign it. The next day, a few hours before the ceremony, she signed it. Her hand trembled, but she quickly pulled herself together. An elegant squiggle on paper sealed the deal, in which love and cold calculation were intertwined together. Jack didn't answer. He just nodded, as if there was no other option. Among the guests, there was one person who was closely watching what was happening: Steve Henderson, Jack's best man and his best friend. He has long been accustomed to seeing through people. Steve and Jack had known each other since university, where, despite their different personalities, they quickly became inseparable. Steve was always the one who knew how to diffuse tense situations. He never took life too seriously, unlike Jack, who from his youth thought everything through a few steps ahead. Together, they experienced a turbulent youth nights in bars, fights in student clubs, trips in an old broken-down pickup truck into the unknown. But even then, Steve knew that Jack was different from everyone else. His ambitions were ironclad, and he himself never allowed himself to be weak. Jack sat in his office, staring at one point. Thoughts rushed chaotically in his head, crashing against the walls of reality. He had just allowed himself a short escape into the past, remembering their wedding day, their happy moments, but now he was forced to return to the present nightmare reality. Pregnancy. Treason. Who is the child's father? My heart was pounding wildly in my chest. He was a man who always had everything under control, but now his world was falling apart. Jack knew one thing: the child was not his. His hands shook as he reached for the phone. There was only one thought in my head: Steve. Only he could help. He was always there, always knew how to figure out even the most difficult situations. Jack dialed the number. One beep, two. Henderson, said a familiar hoarse voice. Steve, I need your help. Jack's voice was muffled, as if it didn't belong to him. What's happened? Wariness instantly appeared in my friend's voice. Jack ran his hand over his face, feeling the veins in his temples pulsate. He didn't know how to say it out loud, how to formulate it without exploding in rage. Emily is pregnant. He paused. Steve was silent for a couple of seconds, then cursed quietly. But you can't have children. Absolutely, Watsons. There was silence. Steve didn't need to explain what hell was going on in his friend's head right now. Okay, the detective finally said, then we'll find out who this bastard is. Where and when do we meet? Jack took a deep breath, trying to calm down the trembling in his hands. Redstone Bar, tomorrow at lunch, he said into the phone. I'll be there, Steve answered briefly and hung up the call. The Redstone Bar was one of those places where the dim lights, the smell of whiskey, and the muted music created a feeling of comfort, even for those on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Jack took a table in the far corner and ordered himself a double bourbon. Are you already drinking without me? A hoarse voice rang out. Steve sat down opposite him, throwing a bunch of keys on the table. His gaze slid over Jack's face, noting the circles under his eyes and his tense jaw. You look like you just got run over by a truck. It feels about the same, Jack chuckled, draining his glass in one gulp. Steve nodded to the bartender, showing two fingers, one for himself, the other for his friend. Okay, tell me what you have. Just the facts, Jack clasped his fingers. Emily is pregnant. I'm sterile. The equation doesn't converge. Who is the father? This, my dear Watson, is what we will find out. Jack grinned gloomily. Steve accepted the glass from the waitress and twirled it in his fingers. Do you have any suspects? Jack pursed his lips. He didn't even want to think about it, but the list of candidates was too long. There are several. One of her colleagues. Maybe one of our mutual friends. You just described half the city, Steve grinned. Okay, let's start with something simple. Is there anyone who's been hanging around lately? Have you become too attentive? Jack shook his head. That's the point, no. Everything was fine, or I just didn't notice. For the last 6 months, I have been completely immersed in work. This damn contract required all my strength and time. Constant negotiations, business trips, sleepless nights. I paid almost no attention to her. Maybe that's when it all started. Steve nodded thoughtfully, taking a sip from his glass. So, first we have to gather information. Set up surveillance, see who she's dating. In the meantime, I'll play the role of a happy future father. Jack grinned bitterly. Exactly, Steve confirmed. Don't give yourself away, don't show doubts. Let everything take its course, and we will figure out who this son of a bitch is. Emily sat in the cozy VIP room of a trendy bar, sipping a cocktail, her long fingers lazily sliding along the glass stem of her glass. Twilight, muffled music, and the aroma of expensive perfume created an atmosphere in which it was easy to forget about morality. Opposite her, Lisa, her best friend, shook a glass of champagne with a mysterious smile, listening carefully. Well, you're truly the queen of intrigue, Lisa grinned, lazily running her finger along the edge of the glass. Jack doesn't even know. Emily smiled contentedly, her eyes sparkling in the light of the soft lamps. Not for a second, she leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. He is so immersed in work, in his illusion of family happiness, that for him I am just an ideal picture, a symbol of a successful life. It's all too easy. Lisa shook her head, studying her friend. I can't believe you took a chance with his brother. How did this even start? Emily ran her tongue over her lips, her smile turning sly. She leaned back on the sofa, slowly, savoring the memories. It all happened too simply. Do you remember that evening when Jack went on a business trip again? I then called Kevin, I just wanted to talk. And he offered to meet. We went to that cute restaurant on the embankment. Wine, laughter, light touches. He was always the complete opposite of Jack, easygoing, spontaneous. He listened to me rather than giving orders. Lisa tilted her head to the side, a sly smile touching her lips. And you decided that a little fun wouldn't hurt? Why not? Emily smiled slyly, her gaze became playful. At first it was just flirtatiousness, but then she paused, playing with her glass. When he leaned over to whisper something in my ear, his lips accidentally touched my skin, and I felt something that I hadn't felt with Jack for a long time desire. Lisa nodded understandingly and leaned forward. And how is he in bed? Emily chuckled, her eyes sparkling. Completely different. She ran her finger along the rim of the glass. Jack has always been so controlling, methodical. He preferred everything to be on a schedule, even sex. No surprises, everything is predictable. His technique is perfect, but his passion is zero. Lisa snorted. And Kevin, Emily bit her lip, her voice became quieter, but there was a sweet tremor in it. He's impulsive, passionate. Everything is unpredictable with him. He likes to tease, to delay, to make me lose control. She closed her eyes, remembering. He can stop in the middle of it, bring me to the brink just to hear me beg. And then, her lips curved into a sly smile. Then he leaves me no choice but to completely disappear into him. Lisa bit her lip, watching her friend with undisguised curiosity. Oh, friend, you're definitely playing with fire. Emily took the last sip of her cocktail, her eyes clouded with sweet memories. Now I'm just enjoying the game. Lisa grinned, leaning forward. Men are so naive. They think they control everything, but in reality they live in sweet ignorance. Jack is sure that this child is his, and Kevin is sure that I will soon tell him the truth. But neither of them understands that the truth is what I choose to make true. Exactly, Emily laughed, narrowing her eyes slightly. They see what they want to see. Jack is convinced that I'm the perfect wife, and Kevin thinks that I'm just unhappy and waiting for him to save me. But in fact, she didn't finish, she just smiled slyly, sipping her cocktail. The world was hers at that moment, and she was enjoying the game she had gotten herself into. Lisa leaned closer, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. But really, she smiled, slowly spinning the glass in her hand. Emily narrowed her eyes, as if debating whether to share her thoughts. She ran her finger along the thin stem of the glass, then chuckled. Actually, Everything is going according to my scenario. Her voice was low, almost purring. Jack works, not suspecting that he will be raising someone else's child. Kevin dreams that I will give up everything for him, but none of them understand that I have already chosen myself. Lisa grinned. You mean you won't end up with either of them? Why, Emily shrugged. So far, everything is going perfect. Jack gives me stability, money, status. Kevin passion, emotions, a sense of newness. But none of them can give me everything at once. She leaned closer, her voice becoming even quieter, as if she was revealing the sweetest secret. If I leave Jack, I will lose my comfortable life. If I choose Kevin, sooner or later, he will become just like his brother, demanding, boring, expecting loyalty. And if I stay with both, Lisa smiled widely. Do you want to say that you will continue this game? Emily nodded slowly, her eyes sparkling mischievously. As long as it's profitable. But I'm not naive. Sooner or later, Jack may suspect something, and Kevin may get tired of waiting. Do you have a plan in case something goes wrong? Emily took a sip of the cocktail, savoring its sweetness, then slowly ran her tongue over her lips. Not yet, but I'll definitely come up with something. Kevin Collins stood at the window of his apartment, absent-mindedly swirling a glass of bourbon in his hand. The amber liquid lazily flowed down the walls of the glass, reflecting the warm light of the night lights. The city below was noisy, full of life and movement. Car horns, muffled conversations of passers-by, rare bursts of laughter. All this was so far from his thoughts, so insignificant compared to what was tormenting him from the inside. Emily. He couldn't get her out of his head, no matter how hard he tried. He tried to convince himself that this was just a game, a passing amusement, a random challenge to fate. But every day the realization gripped him deeper and deeper. It was not just a rivalry with Jack, not just a thirst for victory over someone who was always ahead. No, now it was about her. About her voice, which gently touched his mind, about her gaze, which penetrated into the very core, making him forget about everything. For the first time in his life, he felt that he really wanted something. Not to prove his worth, not to show something to someone. He wanted her. He took a sip, letting the strong alcohol burn down his throat. The lips twitched in a faint smile. Nonsense. He knew very well that this game had its own rules, and she played them brilliantly. She enjoyed the situation, the fact that one brother was in the dark and the other was waiting. But what if she has already made her choice? What if he was just another spectator in the show that she so skillfully directed? Childhood always reminded him of a chess game, where the pieces were placed in advance. Jack is the king, the eternal winner. The father is a wise but cold strategist who always knew who would become the champion in this game. And Kevin was just a second-tier figure, devoid of real value. Regardless of how he moved on the board, his success was attributed to luck, chance, coincidence. You're just lucky, my father said, and this lucky always sounded like disappointment. This voice haunted him all his life. In every achievement, in every step forward, this cold echo was heard. You just happened to be in the right place. But with Emily, it was different. He couldn't attribute everything to luck here. Here he felt that he had the situation under control, that he was one step ahead of Jack. He saw her looking at him and heard her voice become softer when they were alone. He knew that he was giving her something that his brother could not give. But what next? An alarming suspicion settled in my chest. Pregnancy. This thought was like a thorn, slowly but surely tearing apart my mind. Jack had no doubt he was sure that the child was his. But was he sure himself? Kevin tried to remember dates, moments, their meetings, and count the weeks. The heart skipped a beat. What if? What if it was his child? What if he becomes a father? This thought was frightening, but at the same time frighteningly sweet. He didn't know what to do with this knowledge. Confess to Jack, force Emily to tell the truth, or remain silent and let fate put everything in its place. He felt his fingers tighten on his glass. Everything in his life always went according to a script that was not written by him. He was used to giving in, used to playing second roles, being in the shadows. But maybe, for the first time in his life, he should take a step forward. destroy the illusion of your brother's ideal life, intervene in his fairy tale, and claim your right to happiness. The bourbon burned his throat again, but this time he could barely taste it. A fire flared up in my chest. He always strived to be decisive, but now he hesitated as never before. For the first time in his life, he stood on the threshold of something truly important and had no idea where he would take the next step. Jack sat at the kitchen table, his eyes sweeping over the perfectly presented breakfast. The sun's rays made their way through the huge panoramic windows, filling the house with a soft, cozy light. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the aroma of toast and vanilla croissants. Everything looked like in the picture beautiful, harmonious, but chaos reigned inside him. Emily sat opposite him, casually leafing through a glossy magazine. Her long fingers slid lazily over the pages, as if nothing could disturb her serenity. Jack watched her, feeling a strange heaviness in his chest. He took the cup, took a slow sip, and carefully began talking. I kept thinking, we have spent so little time together lately. His voice sounded soft, but doubts raged inside. I want to make up for lost time. How do you like the idea of spending the weekend together? Maybe dinner at our favorite restaurant. Emily froze for a second, as if she had been caught off guard. But then, quickly pulling herself together, she looked up, bowing her head slightly. A light, almost mechanical smile played on her lips. Thoughts raced feverishly through my head. She had planned to spend this weekend with Kevin, but now she needed to make sure Jack didn't suspect a dirty trick. It's nice, Jack, really. She paused, as if searching for words. But I already have some plans. Which? He tried to make his voice sound casual, but his stomach sank unpleasantly. Lisa wanted us to spend time together. A little bachelorette party, relax, maybe a massage. She shrugged her shoulders mockingly. You won't mind, will you? Jack slowly put the cup down on the table, keeping his usual mask of calm on his face. Everything was boiling inside. Of course not, he answered in an even voice, although a fire was raging inside. He paused, as if thinking, and then, as if by chance, added, But you know, I still want to be more involved in this new chapter of our lives. For example, can I drive you and pick you up? Emily raised her eyebrows slightly, then grinned, but something elusive flashed in her eyes. Jack, you act like I need custody. She shook her head and laughed, but it sounded a little strained. I'm pregnant, not helpless. It's not about custody, he shrugged, taking another sip of coffee. I just want to be close. She looked at him for a long time, as if she was trying to read something in his face. Then she picked up the magazine again, but not as confidently as before. Jack pretended to enjoy the conversation and casually asked, By the way, you spend time with Lisa so often. I wonder who else is with you. Any of her friends? She tensed. It was barely noticeable, a slight movement of the shoulders, subtle confusion. A thought flashed through her mind. What if Jack found out how much fun she was having with Kevin? She imagined his reaction: shock, rage, pain, and it made her involuntarily smile. Well, sometimes friends join us, you know, Lisa is sociable. Her voice sounded too light, too careless. Yeah, I understand. He drawled, as if pondering her words. By the way, have you already made an appointment with the doctor? How do you feel? A thin slice of silence hung in the air, but after a second Emily smiled and waved her hand. She herself was not yet accustomed to the idea of pregnancy. It all seemed like something unreal, something that existed only in words, but not in her life. Her body had not yet changed. She did not feel dramatic changes, but the awareness that a new life was being born inside her kept coming in waves of anxiety and surprise. Oh yes, of course. I'll sign up next week. It's okay. Don't worry. Too easy. Too fast. Jack looked at her, but didn't say anything. He simply nodded, pretending to believe it. Inside, a plan was already taking shape. She needs to tell Steve this is a chance to get some information about who her lover is. Jack sat in his office, clutching his phone so tightly that his fingers went numb. A new message from Steve flashed on the screen, a short video. His heart beat dully and painfully, as if anticipating the blow he would have to endure. Taking a deep breath, he pressed play. A soft noise came from the speaker's muffled laughter, the rustle of fabric, someone's contented exhalation. The hotel camera recorded a spacious room, immersed in the golden light of night sconces. The sheets on the wide bed were rumpled in disarray, the covers had slipped to the floor, as if confirming the previous night of passion. The aroma of wine and expensive perfume seemed to be in the air, mixed with the shadow of someone else's intimacy. On the table by the bed stood two glasses, one half full, the other knocked over, and next to it were thin straps of women's underwear, discarded haphazardly in the heat of the moment. The chair by the window is slightly shifted, as if someone had recently sat there, lazily watching the twinkling lights of the city. Everything in this room said that they didn't just relax here, they enjoyed each other here without regard for the consequences. Emily is in the center of the frame. Her hair is disheveled, the strap of her silk underwear is slipping over her shoulder, her skin is still flushed from the recent heat. She leaned back, laughing loudly, lightly, like she hadn't laughed next to Jack for a long time. Next to her, leaning against the pillow, is Kevin. His naked torso glimmers lazily in the soft light, and his lips are touched with a smug grin. He looks at Emily the way a man looks at the woman who now belongs to him. His hand slides along her back, confidently, habitually. Jack froze, his insides clenching into a tight ball. "You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this," Emily breathed, her fingers resting on Kevin's chest, tracing the lines of his muscles. "He's so predictable, Kevin. I could tell him anything, and he would believe it. This man lives by the rules, like a robot, not realizing that the world has long belonged to those who know how to play." Kevin chuckled, running his hand down her back. "You're right. He is always so correct, so ideal. He thinks that since he has money and power, then this is enough to be a man. But tell me honestly, Emily, have you ever felt like a woman with him?" Emily laughed, throwing her head back. "God, Kevin, don't make me laugh. Jack is not a man, but a walking bank account with an expensive suit. He thinks he controls my life, but in reality, he is just my personal sponsor. I smile at him, make eyes at him, and he immediately fulfills any wish, like an obedient puppy." Kevin laughed with her, his fingers sliding along her thigh. "What about in bed? Has he ever managed to surprise you?" Emily rolled her eyes theatrically. "Do you want to know the truth? Every time I closed my eyes and imagined someone else, anyone, because with him, it's just mortal boredom. It's like he's doing him a favor. I'm not even sure that he even understands what a woman wants." "That means he'll never be a real man," Kevin said mockingly. "He's not just bad, Kevin. He's pathetic," Emily said through her laughter. "And the funny thing is, he believes that this child is his." Jack froze. The world before his eyes narrowed to a single phrase. "Damn, Emily," Kevin continued. "Is the baby mine?" "Yes, yours, silly," she giggled, wrapping her fingers around his neck. "Can you imagine that he will raise your child, firmly believing that it is his? Isn't this the highest mockery?" Kevin grinned contentedly. "This is even better than I could have imagined." Kevin stretched out on the bed, stretching, and then grinned. "I finally managed to surpass him. Imagine, his ideal life is fake. He lives in an illusion, and I took everything from him. His wife, his pride, his honor. This idiot will walk around and think that he has a family, that he controls something, but in reality he is just a pathetic cuckold who is being used in the dark." Emily burst out laughing, lazily running her hands through his hair. "Oh, Kevin, you should see how he looks at me when I talk about the future. So touching, so caring. If only he knew that I have been discussing for a month what name to give your child, and not his. He thinks that I am his loving wife, and I am just playing my role. After all, someone has to pay the bills." Kevin laughed. "Let him play the role of a happy father. Let him spend millions on you, and then, when he understands the truth, it will be too late. You're right, he was never a man, and now he doesn't even look like a man." Emily sighed in mock pity. "Maybe we should tell him directly. Although no, I even like to watch him try. In the evening, for example, he invited me to have a romantic dinner. Poor, Poor Jack. If only he knew that in an hour I would be in your bed. Jack turned off the video. His breathing became ragged. His chest felt tight as if someone was squeezing it in a vice. Only one thought was pounding in his head. This is the end. The end of their marriage, the end of the life he had built. His own brother, his wife. They mocked him, they cuckolded him, they enjoyed his humiliation. It seemed to him that the walls of the office were shrinking, that the air was becoming thicker. He stood up abruptly, walked to the bar, poured himself a whiskey, but his hand shook so much that part of the drink spilled on the table. He did not taste, did not feel the warmth of alcohol, only the icy emptiness inside. The office door opened quietly and Steve appeared in the doorway. "Easy prey," he said calmly, leaning against the doorframe. "They didn't even try to hide. All I needed was a couple of calls and access to the cameras. To be honest, I thought it would be more difficult." Jack was silent, his gaze glued to the turned-off phone screen. He felt something inside him break, slowly but irreversibly. "But you know, it's better to find out the truth now than in 10 years. Jack clenched his teeth. Something heavy, uncontrollable, grew in my chest. He felt the seething rage gradually turn into icy calm. "What will you do?" Steve asked quietly. Jack looked up. There was no pain or tears in them, only icy determination. "I will destroy them," he said quietly but clearly. Steve nodded. "I knew you would say exactly that. Therefore, I have already prepared several options for how this can be done." Kevin woke up from a loud knock on the door. A headache throbbed in his temples, the consequences of a stormy night. He didn't even remember how he returned home. "How much did you drink?" "Enough to switch off, but not enough to foresee trouble." The knock was repeated, this time sharper. "Kevin Collins?" "Police. Open the door." He froze. My heart sank. What the hell is going on? He glanced at the clock, 7 in the morning. Taking a deep breath, he pulled on his jeans and shirt, staggering towards the door. The lock clicked, and the next moment several people in uniform rushed inside. "You have been arrested on suspicion of fraud, tax evasion, and possession of prohibited substances." The officer's harsh voice rang out. "You have the right to remain silent." Kevin didn't have time to say anything. He was turned around and pressed hard against the wall. The cold metal of the handcuffs closed around her wrists. What the hell? He tried to break free, but the officer only squeezed his hands tighter. "We have proof, Mr. Collins. Your signatures on forged documents, transfers of funds to offshore accounts, evidence of bribes. Oh yes, and a kilogram of illegal substances in your car. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Kevin gasped indignantly. "This is nonsense. I have nothing to do with this." The officer chuckled. Yes, we have already heard that. Find out about the area." He was pushed into the corridor, and he saw several neighbors peeking out of their doors, watching what was happening with undisguised curiosity. Some of them were already taking out their phones, clearly filming videos. Great. Tomorrow his face will be on the front pages of the news. In the holding cell, the air was heavy, smoky, with a subtle smell of dampness. Kevin sat on a hard bench, clasping his fingers. His mind flickered between fear, rage, and bewilderment. Someone set him up. Kevin clenched his fists, feeling the anger boiling inside him. He didn't want to call his father, but he had no choice. Again, another humiliation. The officer reluctantly handed him the phone, and Kevin dialed a familiar number. A few rings and a heavy voice on the phone. "Father, I need a deposit. I was set up." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then the voice sounded cold. "No, Kevin. This time you're handling your own shit." "What? Are you serious?" Everything broke down inside. "Fully. I'm not going to take you out anymore. Figure it out yourself." Horns. Disconnected. Kevin stared at the phone in disbelief. Crap. His father simply abandoned him. "Jack." Kevin groaned and ran his hands over his face. He had no options left. The father refused. The lawyers just shrugged their shoulders, which meant there was only one last chance. The final humiliation. He took the phone and with a heavy sigh dialed his brother's number. The few seconds of beeps seemed like an eternity before Jack answered. Kevin, his voice was flat, without emotion. Jack, I need collateral. I was set up, you understand, right? Kevin's voice trembled, but he tried to remain confident. Framed, Jack seemed to relish this word. Oh, really? You're always so careful. Damn, Jack, I'm not kidding. I need help. I can't sit here. You're not going to leave me here to rot, are you? Kevin tried not to let panic take over, but the desperation in his voice was obvious. Of course not, Jack grinned. We'll discuss the details later. A few hours later, Kevin was released. He did not linger near the station. He immediately headed home, still trying to comprehend what was happening. The rain drizzled, biting icy drops into my skin. He turned into an alley to take a shortcut. And suddenly steps behind me. Heavy, confident, threatening. Kevin quickened his pace, but it was too late. Someone's strong hand grabbed him by the shoulder, turned him around, and the next second he felt a blow. Did you think you could cheat us? The voice was low, dull, with a tinge of gloating. Kevin woke up in the hospital. His head was cracking, his body was aching in pain, and the harsh white light of the lamps penetrated through his heavy eyelids. With difficulty, he opened his eyes and saw his mother nearby. Her face was pale, and her eyes were full of anxiety and fatigue. Kevin, she said quietly, squeezing his hand. Lord, my boy. Emily sat nearby, looking worried. She leaned closer, her fingers gently touching his shoulder. How do you feel? She asked softly. Kevin winced, trying to sit up, but pain shot through his entire body, causing him to groan. It's like I was beaten, he croaked. But not everyone in the room looked like they cared. Jack stood to the side, arms crossed over his chest, looking at him with cold indifference. His gaze was empty, impassive, as if he was watching a casual acquaintance and not his brother. Next to him, in his favorite position with his back perfectly straight, was their father. His face was tense, but not from worry, but rather from irritation. Richard just nodded, then sighed tiredly and, without saying a word, headed towards the exit. Jack paused for a moment, looking down at his brother, before following his father, without giving Kevin a single word of sympathy. But satisfaction bubbled inside him. The first step towards revenge has already taken effect. He looked at the exhausted, beaten Kevin, and for the first time in many years he felt that he was restoring justice. All these years of envy, ridicule, betrayal, now they were returning like a boomerang. Jack knew this was just the beginning. Kevin has not yet realized that everything that happened was just part of a carefully planned game, and he, Jack, was going to enjoy every stage of it. While Kevin slowly recovered from the attack, Jack played his role flawlessly, like a talented actor who had finally landed the lead role in the play of life. He surrounded Emily with care and attention so skillfully that it seemed as if nothing else existed in the world except her. His gaze was always full of tenderness, his touch was careful and affectionate, his voice was warm, soft, slightly lowered, as if every word addressed to her was filled with deep feeling. Jack started every morning by getting up before Emily, trying not to wake her, and heading to the kitchen. There he carefully prepared breakfast, selecting only the freshest things golden, still warm croissants with chocolate melting inside, an omelet with juicy herbs and aromatic spices, freshly squeezed orange juice, smelling of the sun and southern gardens. He carefully laid everything out on the tray, adding small details of flour in a miniature vase, a napkin with embroidered patterns, her favorite cup with a thin rim, from which the tea seemed especially tasty. He then carried breakfast into the bedroom, opening the door quietly so as not to wake her too suddenly. Emily woke up to the aroma of fresh coffee and the light touch of Jack's lips on her temple. These morning kisses became something familiar to her, almost necessary, like a ritual without which the day would not start correctly. She opened her eyes and saw his smile in front of her, sincere, warm, one that was easy to believe. During the day, he wrote her short messages, asking how her day was going, reminding her that he missed her. Sometimes he sent photographs, either of his hand holding a cup of coffee with the caption, "I miss your voice at this table," or postcards with sweet words, which he quietly put in her bag. and the evenings became real romantic miniatures. Jack arranged candlelit dinners, chose music with soft melodies, and made sure that the wine in her glass was perfectly chilled. He told stories, shared thoughts, listened to her with such attention, as if her every word was precious. Emily couldn't help but notice these changes. It seemed to her that Jack had completely transformed, as if he had found a part of himself that he had always hidden. He didn't just play the role of an ideal husband, he literally lived this role, dissolved in it, as if it were his true essence. But he didn't just love, he controlled. His concern became more and more intrusive. Now he was not just interested in her well-being, but knew what vitamins the doctor prescribed for her, how many hours she slept, where she was, and with whom. He even bought her a special activity tracker, explaining this with concern for her health. Emily couldn't take a single step without him knowing where she was. Jack paid special attention to their closeness. His movements became more confident, filled with a gentle but powerful determination, as if every time he proved that she belonged only to him. Emily couldn't help but notice these changes. There was a new depth in his gaze, a fire that she had not noticed before. He became bolder in his actions, more persistent, but at the same time his confidence did not suppress. On the contrary, there was a special care in it that did not allow her to feel constrained. He didn't just give her intimacy, he gave her a feeling of being desired, made her lose herself in time, dissolve in his touch. Each evening became a small ritual, full of sensuality. Sometimes Jack simply hugged her, letting her relax in his arms, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady beating of his heart. He loved to touch her skin with his fingertips, exploring every line, as if memorizing it all over again. His voice at these moments became low, slightly hoarse. The whisper fell on her skin, causing her to get goosebumps. Emily couldn't resist these changes. For the first time in a long time, she felt that her husband was not just a caring and reliable partner, but also a man with whom she felt easy and comfortable. Jack reminded her of what it was like to be loved and desired. He filled her thoughts, crowding out everything else, erasing the shadows of the past. With him, she no longer needed to seek comfort in the arms of others. Now she had enough of him. Jack easily raised the topic of a future child as if it was something natural, inevitable for their family. He spoke about this confidently, joyfully, leaving no room for doubt. Together with Emily, they spent hours selecting names, going through options, trying them out by ear, imagining how they would sound in the future. Sometimes he joked, leaning towards her belly and trying to talk to the baby, even if it wasn't there yet. He delved deeper into the parenting topic than one might expect. I read articles about parenting, studied the advice of psychologists, consulted with doctors, trying to understand how best to prepare for the upcoming stage of their lives. He enthusiastically discussed each new knowledge with Emily, shared his thoughts, and asked her opinion. He wanted her to see him not just as a husband, but as a reliable future father. They spent their evenings leafing through catalogs of children's furniture, comparing strollers, discussing which cradle would be more comfortable and which wallpaper would be suitable for the baby's room. Sometimes arguments about the color of the walls in the nursery would devolve into light, good-natured bickering. Jack insisted on soft pastel colors, and Emily considered something brighter. He always gave in, smiling and saying that the main thing was her comfort, because he believed. The more such conversations, the deeper the thought of a future in which Kevin no longer had a place penetrated into her consciousness. And Jack knew that at these moments doubts settled in Emily's head. He saw how her gaze became distracted, how she fell silent, slightly biting her lip when he talked about a future together. She was thinking, I doubted it. And that meant his plan was working. Sometimes at night, when Jack lay next to him, pretending to sleep, he felt Emily tossing and turning, her breathing becoming a little faster, and then her slowly reaching for the phone. The darkness of the screen reflected the tension on her face. She wanted to write to Kevin, but her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unable to find the right words. Jack noticed this, and he enjoyed this moment. He knew that step by step he was destroying her confidence in Kevin. But behind his caring mask there was a calculation. Jack watched her every move, every expression on her face, every hesitation in her voice. He could feel Emily slowly becoming lost in her decisions. She no longer wrote to Kevin so confidently, she made excuses for him less often, and there was no longer the same warmth in her voice. She began to get used to Jack in a new way, and he knew it. She had no idea that all this was just part of his carefully planned revenge. Very soon, he will make his next move. Jack sat in his office, lost in thought, surrounded by the darkness of the spacious room. The warm light from the desk lamp cast soft shadows on the massive oak table, making the documents in front of him seem even more significant. His fingers slowly slid along the smooth surface of the leather folder, inside of which was his main weapon, the marriage contract. A document signed on their wedding day, when Emily, blinded by the illusion of love and wealth, paid no attention to the fine legal font. He slowly opened the folder, unfolding the pages covered in cold, impartial text. The paper rustled pleasantly under his hands. Each line was imbued with the strict formality of the law, but behind these words there was a much more personal meaning. It was not just a contract, it was a cage, a trap, into which Emily entered herself, with a smile on her face, confident that this was a ticket to a carefree, prosperous life. Jack carefully ran his eyes over the main points. In the event of a divorce, she received nothing. Neither their luxurious mansion with panoramic windows and an impeccable garden, nor bank accounts filled with money, nor the cars that she loved to drive around in, nor even the jewelry that she used to consider her own. It was all part of the world he built, and in this world there was no place left for her, a traitor. He leaned closer, his eyes falling on the signature at the bottom of the page. A neat, confident stroke of the pen. Then, on their wedding day, she thought she was making a deal that would provide her with a comfortable, carefree life. She considered herself a winner. How ironic. With a grin, Jack reached for his phone and smoothly dialed the lawyer's number. "Is everything ready?" His voice sounded evenly, calmly, but steel was hidden in the depths. There was a confident answer from the other end of the line. "Yes, Mr. Collins. All documents have been completed. All you have to do is sign, and the process will start. As soon as you give the command, Emily will receive an official notification." Jack froze for a second, taking in the moment. Everything went according to plan, exactly and flawlessly, just as he had planned. He ran his fingers slowly along the edge of the contract, enjoying the anticipation. "Great," he finally said, a subtle mockery flashing in his voice. "I'll let you know when I'm ready." With these words, he interrupted the call, leaned back in his chair, and allowed himself a short grin. The end was closer than she could have imagined. The hospital corridor lived its usual life. The booming steps of doctors and nurses were heard in the long, empty spaces. Quiet negotiations were woven into the general background, and the muffled moans of patients created an atmosphere of tense anticipation. The air was saturated with a pungent smell of antiseptic, which ate into clothes, skin, and consciousness, but the faint aroma of coffee made its way through it. One of those waiting was holding a hot glass in his hands, squeezing it like a life preserver. Jack sat in the corner of the waiting room, his legs stretched out and his fingers interlocked. He seemed collected, calm, almost relaxed, but inside him seethed with an icy, ruthless determination. He wasn't here for Emily. Not for this child who, ironically, was never his. He was here to finish Kevin off, to leave him with nothing. He slowly leaned back in the hard plastic chair, lazily leafing through a tattered magazine left by one of the visitors. The pages rustled under his fingers, but he didn't even read the text. His eyes slid over the lines, but his thoughts remained focused on one thing: revenge. At your triumph. Today he was supposed to be the only man next to Emily. He had to erase Kevin from the equation, make sure there was simply no room for him in Emily's mind, so that her entire reality narrows down to one figure: him, Jack Collins. Every time the door to the maternity ward opened slightly, Jack instantly raised his head, intensely listening to the voices, waiting to hear his last name. But then he returned to his indifferent appearance, discarding unnecessary emotions, allowing himself only a slight grin. He liked this anticipation. He enjoyed every minute, knowing that somewhere out there, outside these sterile walls, Kevin was going crazy with helplessness, not being able to be near Emily. The doors opened again, and this time one of the nurses stood in front of him young, with kind eyes and a soft smile. "Mr. Collins?" Her voice was calm, ordinary, like that of a person who had uttered a similar phrase hundreds of times during her shift. "Your wife wants you to be around." Jack stood up, put the magazine on the plastic table nearby, and ran his hand along the lapel of his jacket, as if straightening invisible folds. His face remained expressionless, but satisfaction flared within him. Jack stood up, carefully folded the magazine, and walked confidently inside. There, among the pale walls, dim lighting, and barely audible voices of the staff, Emily had been struggling with pain for several hours, clenching her fingers on the metal bed rails. Her face was tired, damp strands of hair stuck to her forehead, but when she saw him, relief flashed in her eyes. "You came," she whispered, her voice weak but full of gratitude. "Of course, baby," he answered softly, gently squeezing her hand. "I'm here with you. Everything will be fine." He saw her eyes fill with tears. At that moment, Emily truly believed that Jack was her fortress, her support. What, he loves her. She didn't know that it was just a game for him. She squeezed his hand tighter, hiding her face in his chest, and Jack stroked her hair, whispering something soothing. The doctors fussed around, but he remained motionless, his voice was even, and his eyes were cold. Somewhere on the other side of the city, Kevin was rushing around his rented apartment, clutching his phone in his hands. He had already tried to call Emily 10 times, but she did not answer. He wanted to be close, wanted to hold her hand, to see how his child was born. He imagined how he gently squeezed her fingers, how he whispered words of encouragement, how he held his child in his arms for the first time. But Jack was there instead. "Damn," Kevin whispered, throwing the phone on the bed. Despair, anger, powerlessness burned in my chest. He had never really fought for anything in his life, but now he wanted to fight, because he realized that he really loves her, but it was already too late. The first baby cry was heard in the maternity ward. Jack looked at the tiny creature being held in the nurse's arms. He knew that this was not his child, but no one in this room should know about it. He smiled and leaned over Emily, gently touching her forehead. "We have a baby, Em," he whispered, making her believe that this was their moment. Emily cried from fatigue, from happiness, from pain, but she squeezed his hand tightly, believing that he was here for love. Kevin sat in his dark apartment, without turning on the light, listening to the silence that oppressed him like a heavy blanket. Outside the window, the noise of passing cars and the muffled voices of passers-by could occasionally be heard, but here, inside, it was empty and dull. Shadows surrounded him, silent, motionless, like a reflection of himself. Unspoken words, unrequited emotions, thoughts that he tried to push deeper, but they continued to emerge, obsessive, poisonous, frozen in the air. He went over and over in his head how things could have turned out differently. If only he had done something differently, if only he had said the right words at the right moment. If only I had held on, not let go, not allowed the situation to get out of control. But now it's over. There was no turning back time, and the reality was inexorable. This child would grow up calling his brother father. Kevin squeezed his eyes shut, clasping his fingers together, feeling his nails dig into his palms. It seemed to him as if something inside him was collapsing, breaking into pieces. He was superfluous, strangers, excluded from the life that should have been his. And it was not just a defeat. It was destruction. Complete, irrevocable. It was as if his existence no longer had any meaning. Jack, standing in the room, silently watched Emily. The soft light of the night lamp enveloped the room in a muted glow, casting blurry shadows on the walls. She sat in the hospital bed, tired but calm, tenderly holding her tiny child close to her. A light smile touched her lips, and her breathing became smoother. Sleep slowly but surely pulled her into its arms. He barely breathed, watching how her eyelashes trembled before closing completely, how the hand that had previously been gently stroking the baby's back froze. Everything went exactly as he expected. A barely noticeable grin flashed across his lips. His plan worked perfectly. Step by step, detail by detail, he brought her to this moment. The house was filled with bustle, turning into a real whirlpool of emotions and movement. Joyful voices, ringing laughter, light jokes were heard everywhere. Someone gasped enthusiastically. Someone looked with affection at the baby wrapped in a soft white blanket. Guests scurried between rooms, leaving gifts, toys, bouquets of expensive flowers on the tables, the aroma of which mixed with the smells of home cooking. In the spacious living room, there was a long table laden with gourmet dishes, glasses of sparkling wine, and candles that swayed gently with every movement of air. Jack's mother, a woman with clear, stern features and the manners of a housewife, accustomed to keeping everything under control, was busy working over the kitchen stove. She gave directions, made sure nothing was missing on the table, and made every guest feel welcome. Her husband, Jack's father, sat in a chair by the fireplace, leaning back and watching all this fuss. He felt something was wrong. It really was a performance, and Jack played the main role in it. He looked perfect as always, in a perfectly fitting suit with a slightly tired, but sincere smile on his face. He was the embodiment of a caring husband and devoted father. He greeted guests with warm handshakes, thanked them for gifts, and nodded with a smile when someone congratulated him on this wonderful stage of life. He held the child in his arms so confidently, so naturally, that even the most skeptical relatives looked at each other with affection. Even Emily. She looked at him and felt how the doubts that had recently torn her apart from the inside were beginning to melt away. Everything seemed so right. She felt protection, stability, felt that she no longer needed to look for answers to the questions that tormented her before. Here, in this house, next to this man, she was safe. But then the moment of truth came. When everyone sat down at the table, Jack stood up and tapped his glass, attracting the attention of the guests. "I am grateful to each of you for your support," he began with a smile. "Today is a special day, and I want to share with you another moment that changed my life." He took out his phone and plugged it into the big screen in the living room. The video started playing. A recording from the hotel room appeared on the screen. Emily and Kevin, their passion, their laughter, their outright ridicule of Jack. The camera clearly captured their conversations. "Do you think he'll ever figure it out?" Emily grinned. "This idiot," Kevin laughed. "He lives in his own world, where I am his ideal wife. But in fact, he's just a convenient ATM," said Emily. There was deathly silence in the room. Emily turned pale, and her eyes widened in horror. Kevin froze, his face turning stony. Marian covered her mouth with her hand. Jack's father clenched his fists. The relatives looked at each other. Someone cursed quietly. "Jack." Emily finally squeezed out, tears already in her eyes. "It's not what you think." "That's exactly what I think," he answered coldly. "You betrayed me, laughed at me, took advantage of me. But now the game is over." He slowly turned to her and placed a folder of documents in front of her. "This is a divorce agreement. You signed your sentence on our wedding day, Emily. You knew perfectly well what you were getting into and how it would end." She took a deep breath, realizing what was happening. Her hand shook as she opened the folder and scanned the text. "Jack, I can't be left without everything." She raised her eyes full of horror at him. "This is unfair." "Unfair?" Jack grinned, but a hurricane of hatred raged in his eyes. "You dare talk to me about honesty? Are you talking about justice when you yourself trampled everything we had, when you spat in my face behind my back? You betrayed me with a dirty grin, mocked me, considered me a non-entity. And now you're scared, right? Do you feel what it's like to stand on the edge of an abyss and realize that there is no way out? What emptiness awaits you? And that, Emily, is not dishonesty. This is your verdict." She looked back at Kevin desperately, but he just clenched his jaw and looked away. "What about the child?" Emily shouted, as if hoping it would make a difference. Jack looked up at her with an icy gaze and grinned. "Child, you didn't know one small but very important detail. I cannot be a father. Never. I'm infertile, Emily. So get a DNA test. Maybe it's not even Kevin's baby. Who knows who else you've been hanging around with?" There was a sharp gasp in the room, as if everyone simultaneously realized what was happening. Emily gasped, her face contorted in horror. Now even her last hope to use the child as a shield was destroyed. "No, no, that's not true," she whispered, shaking her head. "Jack, please. Please?" He bowed his head, watching her collapse with pleasure. "Where was your please when you were in bed with my brother? Where was your please when you mocked me?" Emily couldn't stand it. She burst into tears and fell to her knees, clutching the edges of his trousers with her fingers. "Jack, please. I'll fix everything. Just don't do it." He calmly looked down at her, like she was looking at trash that needed to be thrown away. "It's too late, Emily. You have already made your choice." He pulled his leg out of her grip and walked away without looking back. Behind him, sobs were still heard. Quiet voices were whispering. Someone was already leaving the house, not wanting to witness this shame. After the revelation, the house, filled with noise and joy, turned into a place of chaos and rage. The faces of the guests no longer expressed delight. Now their looks were filled with contempt, disgust, and shock. Everyone who had ever supported Emily and Kevin now looked at them as if they were traitors who could not be forgiven. They became outcasts in their own family, among those who once accepted them with open arms. Jack and Kevin's father, Richard Collins, was silent for a long time, clutching his glass in his hands. The veins bulged on his fists, his face burned with anger, but his voice when he spoke was icy and merciless. "You." His gaze settled on Kevin, and there was not a drop of pity in him. "You were my son, my blood. So what did you do? You didn't just sleep with his wife. You betrayed your family, your brother." His voice suddenly broke into an angry roar. "You thought you could get away with this? Did you think that you could move on with your life as if nothing had happened?" Kevin swallowed convulsively, trying to find words, but his father suddenly threw the glass into the fireplace with a crash. Broken glass scattered across the floor, causing everyone to involuntarily recoil. "You have disgraced not only yourself, but also our family. You are nothing. You are no longer my son," Richard growled. "Get out of my house, from my life. I don't want to see you anymore." Kevin froze as if he had been hit. He couldn't believe his ears. "Dad, no, you can't." His voice trembled. He didn't believe that his father was really ready to cross him out. "This is all a mistake." "Error," Richard laughed bitterly. "A mistake is an accidentally broken vase. A mistake is being late for a meeting. And you deliberately betrayed your family. This is not a mistake. It is your conscious choice, and now you will pay for it." Emily sank into her chair, knowing that things weren't going to be the best for her now. She cast a desperate glance at her parents, hoping for support, but her mother just shook her head, disappointment in her eyes. "How could you?" Her voice was quiet, but that only made it worse. "We gave you everything, Emily. You were our pride, and now you're just a disgrace." "Mom, Dad, please." Emily began to choke from rising panic. "You understand, I made a mistake." Her father, Thomas, pursed his lips into a thin line and sighed heavily. "You ruined everything, Emily. Family, trust, your life. We can't let you destroy this child too." Lauren looked at her husband and nodded. Then, looking at Emily, she said words that sounded like a death sentence. "We're taking the child. You don't deserve to be his mother. You will destroy him, just as you destroyed yourself." Emily screamed, jumping up from her seat. "No, you can't. This is my child." Kevin and Emily were left standing in the center of the living room, broken, devastated, unnecessary to anyone. Nobody looked at them with pity anymore, only with contempt. There was deathly silence in the house. 10 years later. After that fateful night when all the masks fell, Jack, invigorated by a brutal victory, finally regained control of his own life. At that fateful time, when the traitors were exposed, his soul simultaneously burned with rage and cold determination. But behind this victory lurked an invisible wound, the memory of the pain that tormented his heart for a long time. His achievements seemed impeccable. A successful businessman with an iron grip, a man who was spoken of with awe and fear, as if about the living embodiment of power and strength. However, even years of triumph could not drown out the echoes of loss and loneliness that constantly whispered to him that his heart was left broken and restless. Every night, when silence fell over his luxurious but cold world, Jack felt a melancholy symphony playing out in him under the weight of accumulated grievances and disappointments. He built high, impenetrable walls around himself, like a stronghold, convincing himself that love was just an illusory bliss, a deceptive mirage that could never flood his heart. These walls reflected his fears, pain, and deep disappointment, leaving inside only echoes of his former tenderness. And then, when it seemed that nothing could penetrate this icy bastion, Mary appeared in his life. She was like a quiet ray of light in the dark corridor of his soul, small, modest, and soft, with eyes that reflected the pain of the past, but also genuine sincerity. Mary herself went through betrayal and loss, and this is what made her heart beat in unison with the suffering of others, giving her the ability to feel and forgive. Her presence was not bright or intrusive. She did not seek to attract attention, did not try to impose her views or change it. Instead, like gentle rain on a sultry desert, she quietly but surely penetrated into the most secluded corners of his soul, washing old wounds and giving warmth that he had considered unattainable for so long. Mary did not demand proof of love, did not put forward conditions, and did not set ultimatums. Her silent support was like a quiet melody that quietly filled the emptiness of his heart. In her eyes there was no condemnation or fear of his past, only deep understanding and compassion that could melt even the coldest and stony barriers. With each new day, her gentleness and patience penetrated deeper, awakening long-forgotten feelings in Jack: tenderness, awe, and the desire to trust, despite all fears and doubts. At first, he perceived each new feeling with cautious wariness, in small, almost timid steps, as if he was afraid that all this was just another deception, another illusion that could again break his fragile heart. But Mary did not betray. Her love was sincere and pure, like crystal-clear water in a mountain spring, and it was she who became the force that destroyed the walls of loneliness. With every moment spent together, he felt a warm, soothing feeling arise within him that dispelled the cold and pain of the past years. Mary was a quiet beacon for him, illuminating the path through the darkness of doubt, and her non-judgmental, gentle acceptance helped Jack believe in the miracle of love. And now, for the first time in 10 long years, Jack Collins allowed himself to smile, to feel that his heart, once broken and closed, could once again beat in unison with love and happiness. After the loud revelation, Emily's life collapsed like a celestial sphere, split by the stones of her own mistakes. Parents, friends, and even those who had once admired her brilliant charm turned away from her, leaving behind only cold echoes of disappointment. Society, which had previously unconditionally raised her name to the skies, now spoke with contempt for a woman who had betrayed the sacred foundations of trust and destroyed family values. Her name was forever entangled in the network of the stigmatizing label of betrayal and frivolity, and those doors that had once swung open to her with ease and the promise of happiness were now slamming mercilessly, as if trying to finally expel her from the circle of worthy people. The first years after this tragic turn turned for her into an endless whirlpool of despair and pain. Kevin, the only one she counted on, betrayed her, abandoned her like an outdated shell, and found solace in the arms of her longtime friend Lisa. Together, they left the city, leaving Emily alone on the ruins of a broken life, forced to pay for the betrayal she committed. There was not enough money even for basic existence. There was no more work, and the world to which she had become accustomed suddenly turned out to be a closed fortress for her, the walls of which heralded only pain and condemnation. Over time, with a heavy burden on her heart, like stone slabs, she realized that she was unable to provide a decent future for her child. In a painful attempt to preserve at least a spark of love and care, Emily decided to give her baby up to her parents, realizing that only in her own home would the child receive the love and care that she herself no longer lacked. This decision became her greatest sacrifice, a painful admission of her own failure, depriving her of the last vestige of maternal pride and hope of redemption. Despair penetrated her soul like a cold fog, absorbing all bright feelings. Emily tried to drown out the unbearable pain, drowning in alcohol, seeking solace in fleeting novels that promised instant oblivion but only deepened the emptiness inside. Each new connection became an illusory respite, only emphasizing the meaninglessness of her existence. Wandering around the city, she moved from one low-paying job to another, like a homeless shadow, unable to find even a tiny shelter. Tiny apartments in dark, neglected areas, where the walls bore witness to her daily torment, only reflected the destroyed dignity of a person who had once shone so brilliantly in the social arena. At every step, fate threw new blows at her. Judgmental glances from passers-by, whispers behind her back, and cruel reminders of how low she had fallen. Her betrayal, which became the turning point and curse of her entire life, exposed the depth of human weakness and hopelessness. Every day reminded her that the once brilliant star had turned into a flickering light, barely illuminating the path in the endless night. She was bitterly aware of her guilt for betrayal, feeling the weight of guilt and regret pressing more and more every moment, depriving her of any hope for redemption or forgiveness. Nothing could change this fatal choice, and Emily remained alone in a world where her fall became a living symbol of betrayal, frivolity, and the tragic fate of a person drowning in his own mistakes. After the truth, so cruel and merciless, burst into Kevin's life, his world collapsed like a house of cards under the gust of an inexorable storm. Every minute seemed like endless torment. His family rejected him completely. His father burned with resentment and disappointment, mercilessly erased him from his past, and his brother, whom he always secretly envied, left him in complete poverty and oblivion. Broken to the core, Kevin made the painful decision to leave the city, where every corner was reminded of shame and betrayal. He sought solace in the arms of Lisa, Emily's former friend, who promised oblivion and hope for a new life. Together, they believed that they could leave the past behind and start over with a clean slate. A small house in a remote suburb, rented in a quiet corner of another state, became for them a symbol of beginning, a place where, as they dreamed, they could build a real family and forget about the bitter wounds of the past. However, fate turned out to be merciless and inexorable. From the very first days, their new life hit them with an avalanche of problems. Financial difficulties, like uninvited guests, penetrated their every day. Getting a decent job without connections turned out to be almost impossible. Kevin was forced to work two low-paying jobs, crossing his fingers and sacrificing sleep to feed himself and Lisa. Each dawn brought with it new challenges, and Lisa, tired of the endless routine and deprivation, soon lost the illusion of well-being, dreaming of a life where there would be no shortage of expensive restaurants, where there would be no constant restrictions. When Lisa found out about her pregnancy, a spark of hope flared up in Kevin's heart. He believed that the birth of his son would change everything that had come before, would become a new beginning, atonement for all mistakes and defeats. He imagined how a small child, like a ray of light, would illuminate his darkened soul and give him strength to fight. But the dreams turned out to be a cruel deception. After the birth of her son, Lisa did not become the mother and wife he so passionately dreamed of. Instead, one day, after returning from an exhausting night shift, Kevin found only a short note on the kitchen table, written in a cold, distant hand. "I'm sorry, but I can't live like this. You can handle it yourself." These simple words, like an icy knife, pierced his heart, finally destroying the last remnants of faith in a better future. Lisa left, leaving him alone with a newborn child and the bitter realization that everything he had tried to build had collapsed in an instant. But Kevin couldn't afford to give up. He rose to his feet and began to fight like the last night, fighting against the inevitable darkness. The nights turned into endless hours of labor when he, sacrificing sleep and personal happiness, worked extremely hard in order to somehow provide for the little life remaining in his hands. Every wrinkle, every tired line on his face spoke of sleepless nights, of pain and disappointment that slowly but surely consumed him. In the dim light of the old mirror, he saw not the confident man he once was, but an exhausted reflection, a man who had lost everything: hope, dreams, and faith in himself. Sometimes, at moments when the world seemed especially cruel and lonely, he opened the internet, hoping to find at least a drop of solace or inspiration. but instead his gaze inevitably lingered on photographs of his brother, Jack Collins. Images of a successful, confident, and happy man flickered on the screen, a man to whom fate smiled, giving him wealth, respect, and a new family. Every time Kevin saw Jack's smiling face, a storm of envy and hatred flared up inside him. He felt like anger, like a fire tornado, engulfed his heart. After all, his brother managed not only to survive all the blows of fate, but to emerge victorious, taking from Kevin what he considered his rightfully: family, reputation, future. Kevin's days turned into an endless struggle with himself and with a world that seemed unfair and cold. Every morning he woke up with a heavy heart, every moment reminded him of loss and pain. But behind this wall of suffering beat a small heart, his son, an innocent child, which, like the only light in a dark tunnel, gave him the strength to move on, no matter what. There was no longer the same confidence in his eyes, but there was a quiet, almost imperceptible light of hope that perhaps one day he would be able to collect the fragments of a broken soul and build a new life in which pain would give way to, albeit fragile, but real joy. And so, amid the shadows of the past and inexorable trials, Kevin continued to move forward, every step of which was filled with struggle, bitterness, and the undying hope that even after the most terrible storms one can find his way to the light. But most of all, he hated himself. For weakness. For having once chosen the wrong side. For believing that you can build happiness on betrayal. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to the